Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be painting up Ushoran. I don't know how he's pronounced it. Ushoran, Mortarch of Delusion. Yeah. And so I saw this model coming up and he was really cool and I really wanted to paint him. So the check cleared from YouTube, thankfully, finally. And so with the money I earned from the channel, I'm putting it right back into buying a model. And so we're going to be painting this guy up. Now, I'm going to be focusing not entirely on every single detail on him, just the major parts, because there's small details that you could go either way for. So here are all the paints and stuff I use for this entire model that I show how I use, or some I don't. I assembled up to the point where he would get in the way of painting. His head is separate, his fleshy body is in one piece, his mace and little necklace in between is together assembled with his body. His base is separate, his cape is separate, and his furs are fully assembled, but they are separate. So he's essentially in three major pieces, and then his base and head. And then he is primed with black car primer, since it can be used in any kind of temperature or atmosphere. Before I begin, I do want to go over the details of the model and basically say what I'm thinking going forward. Essentially, I'm not going to be using oil paints for this because oil paints do slow the overall painting process down. It's very good for a grunt, low level troops where you don't have to put much detail, and oil paints can rapidly elevate them quickly. So it is a net positive game as far as time and effort. But with this, we're just going with straight up paints, just washes that we create on our own. Overall, his skin is the biggest draw, or the most detailed. The rest of him seems to easily fall by the wayside. So it's a straightforward model. Alright, jumping straight to his skin, which I find to be the most fun part of the model so far. So with Sons of Horus Green, Caliban Green, Pallid Witchflesh, Nurglin Green, and Krieg Khaki, we're going to paint his skin. Oh, and I also use Koala Green Shade and Lamian Medium later on. But, okay, for starters, first, Sons of Horus Green all over. And so basically I have no idea what I'm doing, and because his model, his skin, is so detailed with veins and valleys and stuff like that, I take Caliban Green and turn it into a wash. Basically, I put a little bit of Caliban Green into a bunch of water, and then I apply a few coats. And then I go back, dry brush with Horus Green. I don't show that process here because I go back and forth, and ultimately it doesn't really seem to do anything. His skin is too smooth, essentially. There is detail in it, but it's not enough for my dry brushing to really pick out. And the washes of Caliban Green really don't cut it. So, essentially, I drop the Caliban Green. And then I take Koala Green Shade, which is a greenish-bluish thing, and it fits. So I apply some watered-down layers of this. I do several layers until it looks pretty decent. So with this kind of stuff, less is more. I had to apply multiple layers over time, let it dry, make sure it doesn't fill in the recesses so that the shading and stuff could properly work with this level of detail and with how I water it. It may have needed less or more, it depends on how much water you use on it. Then I went back to Sons of Horus Green, and then basically I just painted the entire thing, basically highlight 90% of the model except the deepest, darkest recesses. Now, it was watered down Horus Green, and so basically I could apply one coat and it was still a bit transparent, and so I could apply multiple layers of the Sons of Horus Green to build up color going up to help a transition from the dark to the light. Once that was done pretty well enough, I took a mix of Sons of Horus Green and added a little bit of Pallid Witchflesh into it till it was brighter, and then I basically highlighted, I don't even know how to give a percentage, but it feels like maybe a little over half, because I just painted lines. So I painted lines across where the musculature was, or the most raised parts, and then I just filled in the area. I just painted like straight lines here and there to try to build out his muscles. He's a pretty complicated model. He's actually really well done. And so I did this, and then went straight to taking Koala Green Shade, watered down again, and then this time I applied directly into the recesses to build even more shadow right back in. This was more of a back and forth process. It wasn't like apply one layer and apply shadow, then apply mid-tone, and then highlight. There was a bit going back and forth because he's a little complex to understand because of his physical musculature. After the Koala Green Shade, I then take Sons of Horus Green mixed with Pallid Witchflesh, and this time I add some Lamian Medium. This makes it smooth and more translucent, but like the it's not watery and it doesn't bead, so it fits on better. Basically, I paint straight lines, like straight across, and then horizontal lines through it. Or like, basically, I make a bunch of crosses going through it to make it look like he's textured, to focus more on the highlights. And I do this a few times over. This is sort of a skill thing. You'll feel it out as you go, and it built some pretty nice skin texture. Alright, and then I move on from that, and I use Sons of Horus green mixed with a little bit of Nurgling green and Lamian medium to help maintain the translucentness and so it isn't too watery. And then I start applying layers on his hands and feet, and I start building them up. I start focusing on the top flat parts of his knuckles and hands, and then painting lines through them. And I slowly did this a few times over, heavily doing it more times on his fingers than the back of his hand and stuff. So there's a color transition from the Sons of Horus and Pallid Witch Flesh to this Nurgling green. And then I go to pure Nurgling green, and I don't want to use the Lamian medium again. I go straight with Nurgling green in water, and then I just start applying it on his hands and stuff and using it as highlights and build up the layers, like maybe 1 or 2 at most. And then once that's done to only what I can assume is good enough, or at least as I can understand is good enough, I then go to Krieg Khaki, water down a bit, and then I use it to paint the highlights, the top of the knuckles, the veins on the hands and stuff, and his feet. Everything we're doing on his hands we're also doing on his feet. So basically painting straight lines along the tendon, and then painting lines through it to add flavor texture to it, and repeat a few times until it's just right. Because we water it down as translucent, you shouldn't be able to see a hard line there. It should be visibly different, but not 100% the color there. And yeah, and that's pretty much it. I also do the exact same thing to the face. Yeah, pretty much. And his eyes are Krieg Khaki pure. Now, the one thing I didn't show is, because I did it so fast I forgot to record it, basically what I did was I took the Sons of Horus green and watered it down to a thin wash, and then applied it onto where his wrists and ankles are, and then I pulled down, I brushed downwards, and so it created a transitional color it helped the transition of color from his Sons of Horus green to the Nurgling green Krieg Khaki. So it's very quick. I didn't bother to record it, but it was just very thinned out wash water, and I just spread a little bit on there so that there is some more color transition from the green to the very bright green. And I hope this explanation makes some lick of sense. Alright, with Steel Legion Trap, Brinox Hide, Baneblade Brown, and Screaming Skull, we're going to paint the horns and bones. Don't forget on his head and his elbows. So basically, here's what happens. Steel Legion Drab is the base color. We take Rhinox Hide, turn it into a wash, and apply all over. Maybe once or twice. And so it fills up at the base of the bones and stuff. We're good. And then once we do that, we go back with some Steel Legion Drab and paint the top 2/3. Then we take Baneblade Brown and water down a bit. We paint the top half. And then with Screaming Skull, watered down, we paint the top third. And then once that's done, we take pure Screaming Skull that's not watered down, and we paint straight lines along the edges of the bone. If there's not, we paint basically, if you go look at the point of each bone and spike, paint a line north, south, east, and west. Kind of works. And then the tip. His bones on his head are very pronounced, jagged, so it's very easy to find the edges for Screaming Skull. And once that's done, I go back with a little Steel Legion Drab on his bones to add some more shadow on there, especially on his head, so that the color transition from dark to light works. Because the bones on his head are so scattered or fragmented, just the way it is, it's easy to just apply flat colors and then just do a highlight on them, and it's hard to tell that they are having hard transitions, but thin down paints works well. Alright, moving on to his cape. So with Nagaroth Knight, Corn Red, Mephiston Red, Evil Sun Scarlet, Troll Slayer Orange, and Fire Dragon Bright, we are going to paint his cape. So with a 1-to-1 mix of Nagaroth Knight and Corn Red as a base layer all over, inside and outside the cape. We're really not going to focus on the inside of the cape, we're just going to focus on the outside. Because the way the art book looks, it's you're not really going to see it, it's way too buried in the model. So once that's done, we're going to take an airbrush for speed, and with Corn Red, we're basically going to cover 90% of all the thing, especially the top part of the cape, So the top of the outside, only the deepest darkest recesses, you'll be able to see some of the Naggaroth Night Corn Red mix. And then once that's done, Mephiston Red, pure, all over. Then the same thing again with Evil Sun Scarlet, just lighter more, just a lighter amount, so that the more raised areas, you see a little bit of it. So it transitions from Corn Red, Mephiston Red, and Evil Sun Scarlet. A light dusting is needed, and the airbrush is a bit of a distance away so that it comes out more equally. Now, once that is done, you should be able to easily see light and dark shadows. I know if you don't have an airbrush, it's going to be an irritating step. Just use thin down coats, I mean really thin down with water, and it's just going to take longer. It's going to be a bit noticeably different, but, the transition of color is going to be a little different. Well, yeah, so apart from that, once that's done, then with Troll Slayer Orange, I basically take it and water it down a bit, and basically what I do is I paint lines across all the sharp, hard edges. And then once that's done, I then paint horizontal lines going through it after the fact, because once I did the lines, they look terrible. It totally ruined the cape. And so I decided to use this step to make texture. So once the Troll Slayer Orange had lines on the edges, I then painted lines across inside them to make it look kind of stitched and stuff. And it added some pretty decent texture flavor to it. And then with Fire Dragon Bright, I did basically the same thing. Within the Troll Slayer Orange edges and cross-stitching kind of stuff, I did exactly the same thing with Fire Dragon Bright. More of a focus on the top folds and edges. And his cape turned out pretty good. And the last thing I noticed is that the box art has his cape that's towards the ground, has a browner color, which I kind of missed. And so I was like, alright, I'll darken the tips of his thing to make it look darker. So what I did is I took Naggaroth Night, turned it into a wash, and applied it all over, making sure there were no puddles in the entire thing. No puddles at all. I applied it multiple steps onto the bottom parts of his cape, or, well, the top half of his cape that's touching the ground, and I would do multiple layers of this and just dry it with a hairdryer, making sure there were no pools of any of this paint, and it changed the color, so you can see it transition to a darkish purple, kind of where it would be near the ground. Alright, with Death Corpse Drab, Castellan Green, Strachan Green, and Nurglin Green, we're going to work on the furs on his back. So essentially what's going to happen is first, there are 3 different types of furs. So what I'm going to do is a greenish fur and green skin. I'm going to go back later with some washes to help differentiate them, but for the base colors, what we're going to do is we're going to do Death Corpse Drab all over the inner skin, flesh, leather things, and the parts of the fur that'll be labeled as green. And then once that's done, I will then overbrush on them with Castellan Green. Then once that's done, Strachan Green again, which is with a dry brush all over the flesh and the green paint right there. And then with Nurglin Green, I take it, and for the skin, I basically do just line highlights and edges, paint lines along the flesh and on the edges and on the tips of the fur. Now, however, I did this order wrong. I should have done the brown fur first, because the brown fur is more deeper in and the green fur is out more, and when painting wise, the fur, the way it works, would look better that way, essentially. So I jumped the gun and painted the wrong color first. So if you want to do it right, do the next step first and then go to this one. So moving on to the brown. Alright, with Rhinox Hide, Night Questor Flesh, Doombull Brown, and XV88, we're going to paint the brown fur. So the brown fur is going to start off with a layer of Rhinox Hide all over. Then with Night Questor Flesh, I'm going to use this as a base coat to cover the, these things. These are like giant bat heads and stuff. And so basically I'm going to try to fill them in, but keep the Rhinox Hide a color on the edges of their skin and stuff. And then once that's done, I'm going to go back with Rhinox Hide as a wash and apply this on their face a few times to darken and even it out. And then with the Doombull Brown, I'm going to dry brush all over this brown fur, and then once that's done, I'm going to take XV88 and overbrush on the top parts of the fur and stuff. Yeah. Alright, with Steel Legion Drab and Baneblade Brown, we're going to paint the middle fur. So basically, dry brush Steel Legion Drab on the middle spiky fur sticking up in the middle, and then with Baneblade Brown, we're going to paint the edges of the most raised prominent hairs. And that's pretty much it. Alright, with Seraph Sephium, Anthonian Camo Shade, and Coella Green Shade, we're going to add the extra colors onto the fur. So with Seraph Sephium first, we're going to apply this onto the brown fur. The upside of using washes for this is because the furs it's just such an entangled mess of a model that washes will really make it look better because it will take care of like all the intricate details of the shadow of the work. And so this will help with adding more color or solidifying the color. Anthonian Camo Shade is used for the green fur and Coella Green Shade is used for the skin. I use these as pure. For the furs. For the skin, I watered it down a bit so that I could control it better so I could apply a second coat if needed. And in the end, I had to go back and re-highlight some of the fur with their highlight colors because it darkened it a little bit too much. But overall, it did make the furs and skins differentiate from each other. And in the end, it's okay. I would say I chose some of the wrong colors or should have highlighted further. Alright, with Krieg Khaki, Skeleton Horde Contrast, and Rhinox Hide, I'm going to use this to show this skull. So he has a bunch of skulls that are in his fur, and I also do paint the skulls around a bit similar. I end up painting them slightly different, but like it's pretty much the same thing. So Krieg Khaki base, Skeleton Horde Contrast wash. I watered it down so I could have more control over it. Apply wash once or twice because I might have thinned it a bit too much, and then re-highlight with Krieg Khaki, and that's it. The Rhinox Hide was just to refill in their eyes for the shadow, and that's about it. So with Rhinox Hide, Steel Legion Drab, and Baneblade Brown, I forgot to get a picture for it. So basically he has a big rope between his chest and along his hips and also on the goblet. So here's basically what we... Oh, and also on the loincloth he has. So here's how we paint it. Rhinox Hide as a base, cover all over as the base coat for dark shadow. Then we do Steel Legion Drab and we just paint the top part of the rope, the coils. So it's basically a bunch of donuts lined up. That's basically how it is. And we paint the center of each. Then we take the Baneblade Brown and we do a fine highlight line on where we believe the light will hit. This is a very simple, easy thing to do. This rope is very big and pronounced, so it's very easy to highlight, and so just something simple, easy, and done. Alright, with Rhinox Hide, Nightquester Flesh, and Dawnstone, we're going to paint the stone that he's on. And these are the best colors I could come up with that were close to it. Not exactly. So basically with Rhinox Hide as a base, cover all over the stone. Don't forget the bottom of his cape also has stone pillars. And so once that's done, I then take Nightquester Flesh and I overbrush it on top. It's similar to dry brushing, but not as dry, and we just get paint on it. Then we basically take Rhinox Hide and apply a few layers of that as a wash all over. Then we dry brush with Nightquester Flex again all over. And then, if you want to, you can add some more Rhinox Hide as a wash to add more shadow and stuff. But then I finish off with a dry brush of Dawnstone. What I should have done as well is then take some Dawnstone and paint some fine lines on some of the other details or sharp edges or the pillars that were standing up that were knocked down. I would have added a bit more character and flavor to it. But yeah, but this basically works. Alright, with Fugan Orange, Baneblade Brown, and Screaming Skull, we're going to paint the little flesh hands he has on his necklace of jewels. So basically, Baneblade Brown, Fugan Orange to add some color to them, then Baneblade Brown re-highlight, and then Screaming Skull highlight. And I also apply Screaming Skull because apparently some bone fingers are visible, there's no flesh, so I paint those as well. So it's just something simple, quick, and done. Alright, moving on to the metals with Vallejo Copper, Castellax Bronze, and Sycorax Bronze. We're going to paint his shoulder pads. Yeah, so base layer Vallejo Copper all over. Then Castellax Bronze, I'm going to paint it directly into the recesses, shadows, and folds. Now, because it's already received a layer of the copper, This color, even though I watered down the Castellax bronze, it has a lot of trouble adhering to the copper, so I actually have to apply like 2 or 3 layers for it to like stick onto there, which makes it pretty good for like feathering in some shadow. Then once all that's done and dried, I then take Sycorax bronze and apply it on the big flat areas where like light would hit easy. And I have to apply a few layers of that because it's hard to adhere to the Vallejo copper. But it overall looks pretty nice. Then moving on with Sycorax bronze, Seraph Sepia, and Castellax bronze, and I don't show it here, but I'll show it later. Vallejo Alumino, super white metal, the super brightest silver I had. So basically, I take Sycorax bronze, and as the base layer, I paint the mace with it. Then I take pure Seraph Sepia and apply it all over. Then with Castellax bronze, I apply it into the deepest, darkest recesses. The eyes of the statues and stuff like that, and some of between the ribs. And then with Sycorax bronze, I re-highlight pretty much everything, like overbrushing and stuff on the skull layers and stuff. But that's not enough. So then I do a sort of, I think it's 1-to-1, but it's really hard to say because of the consistency of the paints. Sycorax bronze and the Vallejo Alumino makes a very bright silver. I'm going to use this, apply this to the edges of the blades, the teeth, the eyeballs of the mace, the most raised areas, and it turns out pretty well. Alright, with Abaddon Black, Iron Warriors, and Doombull Brown, we're going to paint the chainmail that he has scattered throughout on his cape, shoulder pads, and on his chest and stuff. So basically, Abaddon Black is a base coat just to fix things up, because some paint have gone it here and there, but it's supposed to be black as a start. I'm going to take Iron Warriors, and we're basically going to overbrush this over. We don't want to fill in the Abaddon Black over, we just want this, like, it's basically dry brushing, but it's overbrushing. And then once that's done, we're going to take watered down Doombull Brown, and we're just going to paint this randomly here and there. This is a bright reddish brown, it can look like rust, and so we apply this on the edges, sides of the chainmail. Yeah. Alright, with Corn Red, Evil Sun Scarlet, Troll Slayer Orange, and Fire Dragon Bright, we're going to paint the gems. He has one on his forehead, and he has a few gems on his fingers, rings and stuff. Some on his necklace thing, and a few bright gems on his right wrist bracelet thing. Yeah. Corn Red base all over. Evil Sun Scarlet covering 80 to 90% of each gem. On his head, it's the center part of the gem. Troll Slayer Orange paints the on his forehead gem, the edges of the gem for the rings. The bottom third of each gem, like a moon crescent. And for the bracelet on his right arm, it's the entirety of the gem. Then with Fire Dragon Bright, we paint the tips of the gems on his right anklet. And the head gem, it's like just a couple dots or fine lines here and there along the edges of the gem. And for the little rings, it's the bottom, the very bottom tip, like a dot on each of the rings. Yeah. Alright, now with Corn Red, and I do not use Evil Sun Scarlet, so this is just pure Corn Red. So with Corn Red, I paint his goblet. His goblet's supposed to have like blood coming out of it. So what I do is basically first I take some water down, not a wash, but water down, and I paint some thin lines going down the goblet, like streaks. Then, once that dries, usually with the help of a hairdryer, I make a wash of Corn Red and I apply multiple layers of it so that it like soaks the area around there, changes the color to shade to it. Then I take Corn Red Pure and then I apply like it on the top of the cup, the inside of the cup, and like streaks it along the edges of the top. And it's an artistic thing going back and forth, but it looks pretty good. Alright, with Emperor's Children, Xerxes Purple, and Lamin Medium, I'm going to paint these pinkish spots that are on his head, his mouth, and his elbows. So basically a 1-to-1 of Emperor's Children, Xerxes Purple can create this kind of reddish, purplish, pinkish kind of color. I use it to paint his face cheeks. They're ripped open, so this kind of works, as well as his tongue. And then I water it down a bit and apply multiple layers on the place where the skin meets his horns on his elbows and his forehead. And with a little bit of Lamin Medium to maintain the consistency. And then I get some Carrienberg Crimson, add it with some Lamin Medium, and apply it all over this to just add some reddishness to the elbows and stuff, just a little bit. And then I assemble the entire model. Now the only thing I don't feature is assembling him to the base, because that was so ridiculous, because basically I had to assemble and glue part of him onto one part of the base, then glue the other part from the upside down, and so like I couldn't really film it because it took a long time. It took me like 30 minutes to glue him and get him all attached because of how weird it was, but yeah. Alright, with AK Terrain's Asphalt, I'm going to use this for, well, the base. I like this because the first layer can create a flat raised layer that's pretty nice and has a few cracks, and then you can just take your brush, and once the top is dried, and just like brush it in, and it creates like rocks, pebbles, disruptions and stuff, and so it's really, really good for that. Alright, now with Vallejo pigment Burnt Umber, it's a reddish pigment powder, reddish, brownish, rusty kind of look. Essentially, just take a brush and just apply it all over onto the dirt, the first layer of stonework, the bottom parts of the stone that's touching the dirt of the base, and the purple part of his cape on the outside a little bit. It doesn't adhere as well there, but you can see like the dirt get on it a bit, and so it doesn't undo the purple layer of Nagaroth Night washes that I did earlier. Alright, with 70% rubbing alcohol, AK Interactive Ultra Matte Varnish, and the Army Painter Ultra Matte, or Anti-Shine Anti-Shine Matte Varnish, which is a lie. It's actually very reflective. So basically what I do with a 70% rubbing alcohol, I put it in my airbrush, and I basically just spray the pigment part of the thing until it gets a little damp, and I repeat this process a few times. And so essentially what it'll do, it'll sort of like cook the pigment powder onto the stuff so it doesn't move. And so that helps seal it into the model so it's in there well. Then I take Ultra Matte Varnish. And so the problem with this varnish though is it's a little bit pigmented and it'll turn the model white. So I add water as clear as I can to it until it becomes a little translucent, and then I just apply a layer of it onto his cape, the fur, horns, dead flesh, and onto the stone base he is on, essentially, and all the rocks. And then once that's done, new thing I've done, so I really like how the paintbrushes can create this like wet kind of moist flesh shine, but I found that I can keep it if I take one part the Army Painter Ultra Shine Matte Varnish, or Anti-Shine, and one part Ultra Matte Varnish. I mix the two together equally, and then with equal parts water, it can create a seal that can maintain the luster that the skin will have if it's just brushed. And so I apply that all over his dead flesh, or his physical flesh, and it still has a nice sheen to him. And yeah, the model is done. I just have to paint the base edge color, which I do. But now the model is done. And done. Now, this is a pretty cool model, just on its own, so of course I wanted it. Now, let's discuss how overall I painted this. Now, my main focus was the skin, and yes, I got that. And trying to follow the box art. Overall, there are some things I did very well, there's some things I did good, and there's some things that are passable. It's just how it is. So, alright, so one of the things is I didn't show how I painted every single detail. His bracelets and stuff like that, his jewelry, it's just brass. It's just brass colors. You can easily decide that for yourself. The Stormcast Eternal Head, that's simple. His hair, his teeth and stuff, his teeth are just the bone colors. His hair is just Sons of Horus green with more and more pallid witch flesh so that it fit with the rest of the colors. Yeah, I added some Nihakal oxide to his shoulder pads just to add like some rusting here and there, just a little bit here and there, but nothing to his mace. Yeah, his toenails and other nails was just black with some light blue highlights. These were inconsequential. The heads that he has in his body, I really wasn't sure on how to paint them, and they were so many different. They had all different colors of hair and different species and stuff, and so like that was a mess to try to record or like stuff, so I didn't bother. And I don't have any really good way of painting dead flesh. It's when I go to paint models like this that I realize how lacking I am in certain paints, and it's like, goodness, I have very little to work with. And it's hard to justify going to buy 5 new paints for $300 at GW that I'm barely going to use. You see their recent prices, oh my god. Pricing me out of the hobby. And discouraging me out of the hobby, goodness. And apart from that, so overall with the model, what I will say is his skin, his flesh, 10 out of 10. I did better than I expected. It's shadowed incredibly. The musculature is great. He's highlighted incredibly. The only thing I could have possibly done better is maybe highlight his face an even brighter highlight, his eyebrows and cheeks, so they'd be even more pronounced. Absolute 10 out of 10. His cape is pretty good, despite not being heavily textured because it was so big. I didn't want to like go hard on the texturing all over, so I only did it on the folds. So at best it's a pretty good 8 out of 10. Pretty not bad for a mix of paint and airbrushing, or brush and airbrush. The pigment powder did really well. The color changing and stuff did really well. The cape looks really good. Not as good as the skin though. The furs is where this thing really begins to fall off first. So I looked at the box, I looked at the model, and the paints I chose, I swear they were the right colors, and then when it came out, it looked a little bit too samey. The green fur and the skin looks a bit too samey. The fur, or the skin, is not as pale as I would like, and the fur is a little bit too green on there. And it is also, what I do notice, it's not as bright. The issue with the model, how I painted it, is it's not as bright. The severed heads in his fur, think of them like gems. They should be brighter and more pronounced, but I could not really figure out how to do that right with the paints I had. I don't really have a collection of dead flesh or anything close to that kind of colors. So they ended up being passable. They're detailed, passable mostly because they used washes, but they're nothing special. And the furs, I feel like they're at a good base paint level. I could have probably highlighted them even further, but I generally cannot figure out what colors I could have used to highlight them further. The fur on the top, the center spike, I really like the Steel Legion drab, or was it Baneblade brown, to the Rhinox hide. I really like that color transition, but the furs are not as bright as the rest. They have plenty of shadow, but they're not highlighted well enough that they should be for a model of this caliber. His skin is great. It follows that perfectly. I especially love the transition of the Sons of Horus to the Nurgling green on his, basically the transition of color from his bluish green on his body to his bright green on his feet and hands. That was great. That turned out really well. His mace, the metal, looks great. His the shaft for his hammer, I didn't mention this, but it's painted the exact same way as his stone base, so just FYI. The stone base, however, is a bit lacking in that the highlights didn't go high enough. I probably could have gone back with some pure Dawnstone and just highlighted a bit further with a brush instead of dry brushing on the broken pillar and the steps and stuff where there's cuts and things to make it stand out more, because right now, if I look at the model without light, only his personal flesh and his shoulder pads and weapon stand out. Maybe the horns as well, but like it's hard to see the detail on his base, and the fur is not stand out, but his skin and flesh turned out incredible because it had deep highlights or deep recesses, dark shades next to bright lights, and it really made it stand it out more. His base and stuff, I mean, I did this all under light, so I didn't notice it until now, but basically I didn't highlight further enough on the stone bases and the furs, so that was an interesting attempt. His cape is fine, it's nice. It was just so big that I didn't want to dare to spend 3 hours adding texture all over, so I only added it to the edges. And the bones are fine and everything else, but It's a really good, I'm going to find that probably the best, what stands out the most is really bright lines next to really dark lines, like how his flesh is. That was great work, textured great, it looks great. The rest is a bit dull in comparison. That's sad, but overall it is a good model. Overall, I feel straight up like it's an 8. It should be a 9. The skin is like a 10, probably an 11 for me, because like I did better than I expected. But the base and some other things are like, the skin is so good that it makes the rest of the stuff that's not that good in comparison look worse. That's what I'm trying to say. So I feel that this is an 8 out of 10 for my work. One part was really good, the rest was passable. I don't know if any of my incoherent ramblings even make sense to someone. But that's how I see it. But alright, back to GSC, maybe. I don't know. I gotta see what I have. Because I want to be able to play one game with them before GW releases their codex for them and nerfs them into the ground. So, I do not think I will be that lucky to be as lucky as the orcs were. But alright, so like the video if you like the video, share if you want to share, comment if you want to comment, and more to come when it comes. Whenever. Someday. Bye.